we're going to talk about acculturation. And if you're not familiar with what this term is, it's like basically that process of like dealing with culture shocks and kind of working through those. So if you're traveling or living abroad or studying abroad long term, you're going to run into some of these things. I want to teach you all how to culturally prepare yourself for life abroad. The first thing I'm going to point out is really the obvious one, which is the language barrier. The thing is, that's actually the first thing you're going to notice. And sometimes, depending on where you are, you may not always be able to pick up the language. You may think, I'm fluent, I learned it way back when, and now it's like I get here and I'm like, what are they saying? Because accents and dialects are different, and I've gone over that as many times as I can. I'm telling you, that is going to be a big component. So like in the language barrier, of course, it's great to learn the language, but remember looking at material that can expose you to the dialect that you're most likely going to encounter. And I do a lot of in-depth research, and I'm going to do another video on how I do a lot of research for my language learning, as well as prep for my students as well. So I'll be showing that in more detail. But I would just want to put some emphasis on the fact that language barrier is going to be, you're gonna think French, and you're gonna get there and you're like, what in the world? They're speaking something that is completely foreign to me. They speak very fast. It's not the way I learned it, which is kind of like, again, part of the cultural shock experience. So eventually over time you get used to it because you're so exposed to it. But that's one thing you're going to really get, you're going to notice. I'm just going to put that out there. The second thing is just knowing basic laws and regulations. You don't have to study law, like for me, I didn't have to study French law to just be able to go to France. But the thing about it is that you want to know what behavior is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And the reason for that is because there's certain things that you may think that are okay in your country, but may not have the same type of acceptance in another country. So like, for example, I was reading some travel blogs. I remember talking about it was things to do and things not to do in Italy, like swimming in certain areas. Like if you were to go to Venice and just start swimming in that big, you can get fined for that. Like sitting on certain areas, like tourist attractions or monuments, just sitting on like the steps or something like that. That can be something that can make you accrue a fine. And that's not fun. I know there's a city that is in Italy where they now make these walkways one way because they get so much tourism that they're trying to avoid pickpocketing with people traveling both ways. So they made these streets one way. Imagine one-way streets, now one-way sidewalks, also when I was in France, we had a Metro card that we used and we just refilled it every time, like every week. And I remember they had we had our picture on it, and someone took theirs out, or I guess it fell out or something. And someone actually happened to be checking Metro cards or Metro passes at that time, and she didn't have her picture on her pass, and she got fined like 80 euros, which is pretty expensive. That's almost $100. And when I was living in LA, I got a parking ticket that was like $60 something. So 80 euros is a lot for a Metro pass. So I will just say, as learning those regulations, like even smoking, like people might think like, for French people, they're always smoking. No, if you've been keeping up with a lot of their politics and a lot of their news, they've been cracking down on that, like more regulations on where you can really smoke. I even think about, the Brittany Griner situation, because again, like you may think in America, depending on the state, cannabis is acceptable, but it may not be acceptable in other countries as well. So those kinds of aspects, like you really want to make sure like what you can and can't bring as well, like because you want to make sure that you're going to have a good time and to learn or to to work wherever it is you're working, you don't want to accrue fines that could put a damper on your funds as well. And so those are just some things you want to know. And also you don't want to get arrested. So just knowing those basic things. The other thing I want to talk about is social etiquette. So this is really important. This is one of the things I remember really looking into before I went to Paris. These aren't things that are like law enforced, but these are things that are socially enforced. So like, for example, like when we were traveling through the metro, one of the things that I learned from my research is that you should not be talking really loud on the subway. And there are people who do that. And it can make you a target for pickpockets, especially if you're speaking a foreign language to them. Speaking a foreign language on a train. So it's like, oh, they're foreign, they don't know the rules, and so they'll make it easier, an easier target. You're most likely going to be a target for kind of like different scams. People might come up to you and ask you for money or tell you a sad story or something like that. And so you have to really watch out for that. I was aware that there were like people that were getting people to sign a petition. And it's like, I'm not from this country. I'm not going to sign that petition because it doesn't affect me. And so, and our director was saying, no, don't sign that. That's how they get you. They get you to sign something and then they kind of have someone else come in. I'm telling you, like, pickpockets are like a bigger thing there than I really ever thought. And so that's something to really keep in mind. Dining etiquette, like there's certain times, I know like in Spain, they dine pretty late, like dinner is like around 8:00. Me, I don't eat after 8. I can't, but in some cultures, it's like, hey, we're going to show up at a dinner party. Like in Germany, you would show up on time. Spain, you don't show up on time. It's like, oh, you're showing up. It's like, yeah, you said it was at 8. It's like in Germany, yeah. But in Spain, don't show up really early. It's like, what are you doing here? I'll also talk about Paul Taylor. He did a comedy special called, it was basically like I'll put it in the description, but it was basically a comedy series where he was talking about his experience as an English person. I think he's from Canterbury, and he moved to France. He's now married to a French woman. He has a child there. And he said he was describing his experience of going to a party. He's like, in the UK, it's like we show up at a party and it's like, hey, everybody, and then I go straight for the beer. And then he's like, yeah, in France, it's like you walk in and you have to say hello, la bise, every single person individually. So it's like, oh, like, so it can be kind of rude. They call it filer à l'anglaise, basically to make a English leave, which is like when you leave without saying goodbye to everybody. But then in English, they call it a French leave, which doesn't translate well. It's kind of like, when they talk about French kissing, but that doesn't translate the same way, because for them, they call it rouler à patin, which is like roller skating. So it's kind of like, again, going back to language barrier, things that you call it in your language is not going to be the exact way they call it in another language. I remember my French teacher back in high school, she was telling me about her experience where she ate the salad. They had a course, they had a full course meal, and she was eating the salad, and everyone's like, you're eating the salad. That's the third part in the course. Don't eat it, Like, oh, okay, sorry. But, don't eat the salad. Watch that become a thing. Don't eat the salad. I remember like there's certain rules, like you don't eat, like I know in Italy you don't eat seafood with cheese, or you don't drink a cappuccino after a certain hour. Like I think it's like a breakfast drink. So it's like if you ask for a latte, they'll give you a glass of milk, because in America, latte is coffee. It's like it's a type of coffee drink. But in Italy, latte actually literally means milk. Il latte is milk. So you have to ask what specifically that drink is in the Italian form. The last thing I'll talk about is lifestyle. So as a local, like if you're living there, what are locals doing? Especially like for example, in some countries, it may not be common to go to the gym when, they might walk or bike everywhere. They might take public transit. When I was in France, the metro system was so fantastic. Like I could literally go down the street in one trip, based on the efficiency of it. In some cases, I remember like in Germany, my host father, he had a car, he had a really nice car, but when the weather was really nice, he just rode his bike to work, and it was just kind of what they did. The kids actually preferred to ride their bike, so that aspect is really is going to be something that might really influence your lifestyle. It might be difficult because when I come back to my own country, I'm like, why is everyone so lazy? The city is not that big. Just ride your bike. And it's like, oh, but it's really too far for you to ride your bike to work. And I'm like, it's 2 miles. If you can't go 2 miles, I can't help you. These kinds of things that, when it comes to shopping, they may not always go to the grocery store and get everything. They might, like in Germany, it was a road trip to go get groceries. It was like you go to the supermarket, then you go to the bakery, then you go to the dairy farm. I mean, like you were just kind of going everywhere. Then there were certain specialty shops. Like there was a place where you would get certain drinks that the kids liked. So it really just depended. It really depends. Also looking at what people your age are doing, because generally with acculturation, it's kind of like, because you're the foreigner, it's like you need to get with the program, so it's like looking at, if you want to make friends, you want to find out what people are doing your age. And sometimes it might seem strange. You're like, oh, they hang out and do this. That's kind of weird. But other than that, it's kind of like, what better way to make friends? And especially if you're foreign and if you're, working on your language skills, that can really help you out a lot. So you don't have to be that one person in the group that just doesn't speak. So there's also like apps where you can meet people, but you also want to find ways to meet people in person, because I think that we just need to get off our phones. I'm kind of tired of apps. But finding ways to meet up with people. So that's basically what I have. I really hope this helps you out if you're planning to move abroad, or if you're planning to study abroad in any form or fashion, whatever reason that you're going to another country. Acculturation is going to be a big part, because you're going to be dealing with things that are not familiar to you. You might have to figure out, dietary things, I knew someone who was on our trip in Paris who was she was gluten-free, like she was allergic to gluten, and that was really hard in a country where bread and cheese is kind of like the main part of their diet, so learning how to kind of adjust, even figuring out how to get access to your medication if you take some form of medication, all these kinds of things. So I really would hope that you keep this in mind, and I hope this helps you in any way possible. If you have any questions, put them in the comment, and also you can email me as well, which is also in the description. So have a good one. Bye.